Okay, here we go, guys. The last one of our economic lessons. Okay, question number 3 in our workbook. So let's go take a look at that. Here's our workbook. So question number 3 is looking at scale effects. Okay, and they refer to the aggregate output, the collapse in aggregate output and employment. So that means everything that's created by everybody that can possibly create it. So when that entire system collapses, we're looking at what comes next, right? What's the scale? Chapter 14.6 introduces us to fiscal policy. And this is going to be really important for your final paper, your final project, because fiscal policy is going to play into some of the tools that you have to be able to deal with pandemics and planning. Okay, so pay attention to this unit. This one is really important. Fiscal policy, it introduces us to the tools that the governments use to affect economic growth. And we've talked about in class that circular model, how the government can create policy and taxes that can speed up or slow down the economy, that can impact how households and industry are interacting with each other and influence that circular flow. Okay, and that's where fiscal policy comes in play. That's what are the government's mechanisms, or how is the government using its power to keep the economy moving? Okay, so read through this unit and pay really close attention to the fiscal stimulus model, and we're going to be going into this in a little more detail. Okay, so we're going to core chapter 14.6, and before we go there, we're just going to go quick to our PowerPoint. We left off, we did slide 30, the composition effects. Now we're in slide 31, local government. So just to kind of throw this in there. So state and local governments have hard budget constraints, right? They have budgets that was set up, in advance of this entire epidemic. And, they can't just create money out of nowhere, okay? But the Fed can, right? The federal government has access to the reserve, and based on what kind of policy the government is putting together can influence how much money is being printed by the Fed and how that's being circulated and at what kind of interest rates. So there's power there. Local governments don't have the power, okay? They have the constraints. They have the possibility of bankruptcy, okay? But the federal government does not. Local governments can have a shortfall in revenues, right? Just as expenditures needs rise substantially. So what that means is if businesses are closed and people aren't eating at restaurants and going to movies, they're not paying taxes. Okay, so that money is not coming back to the state, where normally the state would take the taxes and invest them into, fixing roads or after school programs or community involvement work or, feeding people that don't have enough food. So all of those local government programs are affected as revenues fall. Okay, so they have a little bit of a budget that comes from the federal government, but they also they have their own budget that comes from their own taxes. And a local government can't just borrow to finance their shortfall like the federal government can. They can ask for help and hope. Okay, and we've seen that already, where the current administration will give help to different state governments, sort of based on, well, at least what he says is how much he likes those states. But that's kind of an aside. But basically, what we're looking at here is the fact that local governments, have restrictions and have constraints, and the Federal Reserve can buy municipal bonds. So that is a way that local governments can make money. They can sell bonds. So let's say I want to invest in the town of Putney, and the town of Putney can issue bonds. And I can buy a bond for maybe, $100. Maybe I'll buy, 100 bonds for $100. And then that money goes to the town of Putney. And the idea is that in the future, I can cash that bond in and make a little bit of interest on it. And the Federal Reserve can also be buying those bonds. Because let's say right now, nobody in Putney wants to buy a bond. Well, the federal government can buy that bond, okay, and hold on to that. So that's another role that the government has in helping local governments to be able to generate income without them just like giving them a stimulus package, okay? And I do not think the town of Putney is incorporated, so they probably are not even able to make bonds, but that was an example. Okay, town of Brattleboro, I'm pretty sure can make bonds. All right. The next thing that we have is scale effects, right? So we have a disaster and it's getting worse. Okay. So as layoffs and bankruptcies rise, the aggregate demand falls further, right? We have less people working, less businesses functioning, less demand for anything. Okay. The multiplier effect, which we're not going to study in this class, but the multiplier effect amplifies the decline and leads to a recession. And basically, what we're looking at with the multiplier effect is kind of like like the dominoes, right? When you have your dominoes all stacked up, one falls and then everything starts falling. So think about it. Let's pretend I work for a restaurant and I rent an apartment and I have a kid in school. Okay. The restaurant lays me off because they have no business. I can't pay the rent in my apartment. My landlord now has lost income, and my kid is home from school, and I have to homeschool him, but I don't have a computer. So he now is missing out on education, and I'm being threatened with eviction and getting my utilities cut off. Okay, so that's starting to amplify, right? All we had was a single layoff, but now we have a landlord without money and a kid without education access. If we continue, let's look at it from the restaurant side. Me as a restaurant owner, I've just let go most of my staff. I'm trying to keep it together, selling a few meals curbside. It's not working. I give up. Now, if I give up, the building that I'm renting, okay, or maybe I own, now that's not being paid for. All of my suppliers of food, I'm no longer buying from them. People I might owe money to, I'm not able to pay. All of my workforce that might have been on my payroll, maybe I had 15 people working for me, are now not being paid. So that's the multiplier effect, right? We're looking at one little layoff or one little restaurant doing poorly, but it affects everybody around it and then just keeps going further and further and further into the community. Because you can think about the landlord now doesn't have the income. So now they're cutting on their investments and spending, or maybe they can't keep up with the mortgages for their own buildings, or right. So it's just that's what we're looking at with multiplier effects. And that's how it leads to a recession because we're all interconnected in this. Nobody's a self-sufficient farmer on their own land with their own windmill, right? We're all interdependent. So we can mitigate this, right? Mitigate means to address. We can address this by automatic stabilizers, okay? Things that can kind of put a halt to this, sort of alleviate a little bit of this pressure. So like lower taxes, right? And that's something that we've already done. Corporate payroll taxes have been, I believe, either reduced or eliminated. So corporations normally have to pay, this is what you get in your rebates oftentimes when you're filing your annual taxes, but corporations have to pay a tax on every worker, okay? And then you pay income tax also, right? So, and the tax that the corporations pay on the workers go towards Social Security, more or less, okay? So, that helps us. So the government can lower those taxes so people are paying even less, okay? And that can help out. They could also have higher expenditures, right? The government is able to help the economy by buying things. So the government can start buying things. Maybe the government will start investing into pharmaceutical companies and investing into research and investing even into roads and infrastructure, right? All the cars are off the roads. Let's go fix them. Let's keep people working. So those are some automatic stabilizers, okay? The government can lower taxes and they can spend more money. Now, we also have policy, okay? Policy is when you change something completely, right? You make a whole new rule. You're not just lowering taxes or spending or buying more stuff. You're actually changing the rules. So they have expansionary fiscal and monetary policy, and that's what we're going to look at, okay? Some of the tools that we have is the Federal Reserve, right? That's where all the money comes from, and they can lower interest rates, okay, and purchase assets. So an asset, for example, could be a municipal bond from a town, okay? So if the Fed wants to help out states, they can be buying municipal bonds, okay? If they want to help out industry and banks and businesses, they can lower the interest rates on their loans so people can more easily get access to money without it being very expensive. Okay, so those are some tools that the Fed has. The Treasury, okay, the Treasury is who prints the money. They can have tax cuts, they can have delayed filing, increased benefits, and cash payments. Okay, so tax cuts means that people get to keep more of their money in their pocket. Okay, delayed filing, we've already seen that, right? People don't have to file their taxes until June, I believe it is, instead of April. Okay, that way people that owe money, it gives them a little bit of relief. They don't have to pay it right away. They can file a little bit later. Um, Increased benefits. We already saw that with the money that was sent back to families. Okay, the stimulus package where qualifying families received money back from the government. We've also seen states being able to pay an additional $600 a month for unemployment benefits, and that's money's coming from the federal government. There's also cash payments, and that's kind of like that stimulus. Okay, other policies that are out there are suspension of loan repayments, and that's what a lot of the small businesses are hoping for as they're applying for small business loans. They're hoping that the loans will be pardoned, they'll turn into grants, and they won't have to pay them back. Another policy is a suspension of evictions, right? Right now in New York City and maybe other places, there's a big movement about not paying rent, right? Free rent. And there's a movement, I think it's on the state level, that landlords are not allowed to kick out tenants who are not paying rent. So we have a discussion, right? Here we have something called, should we have a flexible universal basic income? And what does that mean? And I'm going to talk about that in our final project, because I actually use that as a reference. But universal basic income is when everybody in a country is guaranteed a certain level of earnings, no matter what. And then as you know, get on your feet and earn more money, of course, you can earn your way out of it, right? So it's only, let's say, like people that make from, $15,000 a year to nothing, that are over the age of 24, all qualify for a universal basic income, and the government will pay them, a monthly amount to get them to that, whatever, $18,000 threshold, right? And once they're able to earn that 18,000 on their own, then that government subsidy is no longer available. Okay, many countries have that, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in my final project. France is an example of a country that has a universal basic income. And then we have a question about individual accounts at the Fed, but we're not going to go there. What I want to do is really focus on this fiscal policy, because this is really important. So let's go take a look there. And before we do that, we're going to go in our workbook. Okay, so again, our workbook is looking at fiscal policy. Okay, so now let's go look at fiscal policy. So we have core 14.6, and I'm going to talk you through this. So this is how governments can dampen and amplify fluctuations. So what we have right now is a very extreme fluctuation. Okay, so we have a couple of things. We have the size of the government. Okay, our current government likes to be small, right? With Trump, the government has very little spending, responsibilities. A lot of government programs have been cut. Even positions within the within government have been cut or not filled. He puts a lot more responsibility onto local government. Okay, so the size of the central government, for example, right now in the United States is small. Okay. But if we look at what the book says, let's see. Unlike private investment, government spending on consumption and investment is usually stable. Right? The government does have a budget, and every year Congress has to approve it, and it's not radically different. So even in the time of this epidemic, right, we still have spending on health and education. And that doesn't usually change as much. Right? It's not like, the cost of face masks, right? Or the cost of hand sanitizer, right? Or even the cost of gasoline that's always fluctuating, okay? Health and education is pretty steady. It might tweak a little bit in one direction or the other, but it doesn't change a lot. And that stabilizes the economy, because we know we can rely on that. We know our schools are going to be open next in the fall. We know our teachers are going to be hired, and we're talking public schools, right? There's going to be teachers, there's going to be a building, there's going to be infrastructure and classes and books. And, every single semester, we always know that the school is going to be there, right? We know that there's going to be hospitals and doctors and Medicare, right? Those things have always been there, okay? So higher tax rate may dampen or fluctuate because it might reduce the size of the multiplier, right? So how much spending we have on schools and healthcare and education might fluctuate a little tiny bit, but the overall, things that are being offered are steady, okay? So that's size of government. The government provides unemployment benefits, right? Because there's always going to be a place for workers there, whether there's a lot of workers or a few, okay? At the same time, the government pays unemployment to people who lose their jobs, right? So even though households have to save to smooth fluctuations in income, right? Few households save enough, right? Some people have that rainy day fund, but most households do not have enough cash on hand to cover more than 1 month's worth of expenses. So what if someone loses a job for 3 months, 4 months, they're trying to find another job, they're a good person, they just had bad luck, the government will jump in and help. Okay, so they provide unemployment benefits so the people are not just thrown out with nothing. Okay, so that has a little bit of a smoothing effect, right? It helps to smooth consumption. People don't have to leave their houses and their apartments. They can have their unemployment help bide them over until they're able to get back on their feet again. And then the government can also intervene deliberately using fiscal policy, and that's what we're at now. Okay? We have a couple of things here. Let's see, when we're looking at like unemployment benefits, unemployment insurance, right? That's something that jobs actually pay into. Employers pay into an unemployment insurance fund. There's a correlated risk, right? In the recession, there's going to be a lot of job loss. So there's going to be a lot of uninsurance claims. So we want to make sure that we're balancing, right? How much insurance companies are collecting in anticipation of what kind of claims are going to be getting made. Okay. And we also have hidden actions. Okay, so an insurance company cannot observe the reason for the job loss, so it would have to insure the employee against a firm cutting back employment due to lack of demand, right? So they're not really there watching every single job, knowing exactly what's going on, but they know what's happening in the economy, okay? Let's see. And then we have hidden attributes. So let's say you learn your firm is in difficulty, the insurance company doesn't know it. Okay, we have this idea of asymmetric information. You might buy insurance when you learn that the company might close and it might get you a good rate. So anyway, so they're just talking about, different ways that people can be interacting with the system of unemployment insurance. Okay, but really what we want to be looking at is fiscal policy. But let's just look at this. So unemployment benefits is part of that automatic stabilization, right? And so we have the automatic stabilization of unemployment insurance. So you have that social safety net. You have a tax system, okay, that helps to kind of keep things moving. And then we also have the third role of government in dampening fluctuations is the use of fiscal policy, okay? So increased government spending or cuts, in taxation, whatever, trimming spending, rising taxes, okay, if there's a boom. All right, remember we looked at that model and we want to have the government wants to keep things steady, right? We want to have that circular flow, not be too slow or too fast, but just steady, okay? Oh, so let's see, we have the parity of thrift and the fallacy of composition, okay? So let's say in a house, if you have a budget deficit, right, you don't have enough money to pay the bills, the family could be worrying about their falling wealth, okay? So they'll cut their spending, right? They might not be going out to eat every night and going out to the movies every weekend. Instead, they might cook at home more, okay, and do Netflix. So it's kind of the same thing when you look at it on a government level, right? But let's look at this. Compare the attempt to save money by a single household and by all households in the economy simultaneously, right? So if you're feeling a little bit of a squeeze right now, COVID-19, even if people want to spend money, they can't. But a lot of the uncertainty, people don't want to be spending money anyway, right? They're kind of saving and waiting to see what's going to happen next. So if you're doing that and your neighbor's doing that and your neighbor's neighbor's doing that and suddenly everybody is doing that, then you have an economy that has completely slowed down only because of the psychology of the people involved. The people think that things might be bad. They are fearful. And because they are thinking and they are fearful and they are not spending because they do not trust in the future, that is making the economy go down. Okay? So that's why economics and psychology are so related, and behavioral economics is fascinating. So now here comes the book. So the book says, assume that all households cut expenditures and put additional savings in their socks, not even in the bank. Okay, nothing else changes in the economy. Now this is, forget about COVID-19, right? This is just life, right? Everyone just got nervous and started to save their money. Okay, they're sucking all the money out of the economy. And so what's going to happen? Your economy is going to shrink, right? So it's kind of like a balloon. You think about your balloon, you pull some air out of it. What happens to that balloon? Okay, it gets smaller. So here we have the aggregate attempt to increase savings led to a fall in aggregate income. All right, wait, we got ahead of ourselves. Okay, from the previous section, we did this. We have a fall in autonomous consumption, right? So our own choices to consume, and that causes the aggregate demand curve to shift down, right? We're not eating so much. No, we're not spending so much. Nobody wants things so much. There's less demand for stuff. Boom, it goes down. Okay. And then that goes through when we go through the multiplier. If people are getting less things and businesses are producing less things, there's less demand for things and there's less need for workers, there's less jobs, less income, more unemployment, right? And it just starts, just starts multiplying. Okay. So the aggregate attempt to increase savings, right, by saving money, actually led to a fall in aggregate income. And that is the parity of thrift. Okay. So stay with me on this, right? I'm saving money because I'm worried about the future. The ultimate effect of that is everybody saving money, nothing's being pumped into the economy's going down, and I actually now have less income because ultimately it's affected my job and my ability and my employer's ability to pay me. Okay, so even though I've increased my savings, I've just decreased my income. Okay, so that's the parity of thrift. The fact that what is true for one part of the economy is not true for the whole is known as the fallacy of composition, right? So our entire economy isn't expanding and contracting at the same rate or the same pace, right? There's differences due to, like what we saw in the article, right? Due to place, due to industry, right? All those are going to be fluctuating and growing and shrinking at different rates. A single household can increase its savings if it anticipates bad luck, but the savings will then be, and the savings will be there if it's unlucky, but if the economy is in a recession, it could cause the bad luck, right? People to lose their jobs. That's what we just talked about. So what can you do? The government can allow automatic stabilizers such as stimulus to absorb the shock, right? Throwing money back into the economy until businesses can get back on the feet again. Okay, here we have fiscal stimulus. So now what we're going to do, big long-winded way of getting to a model of fiscal stimulus. So this is called sort of like free money, right? It's being thrown out into the economy to keep things going, kind of like oil being added to the machine when the car is running. We want to keep everything moving. So here we have a tax cut is intended to encourage the private sector to spend more. Okay, an increase in G. Where are we here? Okay, can offset a decline in private consumption, like the parity of thrift. Okay. So that if we give more people more money to spend, they're going to spend it, and that's going to get everything moving again, get that multiplier in place, and everything is going to be better, right? Kind of like rising tide lifts all ships. So let's see what this says. So here's our economy at point A, okay, and we're at a market equilibrium. So our aggregate demand is equal to output. Okay, here's our demand, aggregate demand. Here's our output. Okay, this is how much we're making. This is aggregate demand, right? How much product people want. All right, here's our line, and here's our point of equilibrium. Okay, so now we have a fall in consumer confidence, right? People get nervous. They start sticking their money under their pillow, stuffing their mattress, putting it in their socks. Okay, they take their money out of the economy. What happens now is there's less demand for goods and services because everybody is saving their money. And now we shift down the scale and we're at point B. Okay, we have lower demand and we have lower output. Okay, so that's that second piece. Because people are buying less, we also need to be producing less and then being paid less because we're not having as much work done. Okay, so our output has declined along with demand. Okay, and that's because of the fall in consumer confidence. And we are now in a recession. Okay, next step, so now the government jumps in. They say, oh my God, we can't have this happen, right? So the government's going to jump in because there's nothing they can do to get people to get the money out of their mattresses. So they're like, all right, we're just going to go and throw some money out there. We'll make up some way to get it in the economy, whether we give it to people individually as a stimulus or we invest in maybe free education for students or reduce tax load or whatever we're going to do. The government is going to be increasing its spending. And it's going to go from G1 right here, from G, this is our original equilibrium, to G1, okay? And we want to do that to counteract the decline in aggregate demand, right? Because we fell all the way down to here, okay? So what happens now is by the government pumping more money into the economy, we're going to get ourselves pushed up to point C, okay? So more money's going to come in. The government has spent, so they've increased the demand for product, right? They want more product, okay? Because they want more product, more people can get to work making that product, so our income's going to go up. So we have a rise in income and a rise in demand cushioned by that government spending, okay? Going from G, pink, to G1. Okay, so the increase in government spending now puts more. They're counteracting that decline in aggregate demand. Cool. All right, so now we're at point C, a little bit better. We're still not out of the weeds, but we're a little bit better. Excellent. All right, so let's go see what's going on here. So we're going to go to our workbook, look at this model, explain the role COVID-19 had in moving point A to point B, be specific and give examples, right? So people were not putting money in their socks because they felt nervous about the future. What exactly was going on? You tell me. Okay? Next one, we have President Trump and Congress already passed a $2 trillion stimulus package in March, and now they passed another $484 billion one in April. Explain how a stimulus package works, referencing this model below, okay? So we went from A to B, and now the government did a $1.5 trillion stimulus to try to get things up to C, okay? So talk about it. Using this model, tell me, where does the stimulus money go? Who pays it back and when? So how is this working? And how would a flexible universal basic income work? All right, from slide 32. Nice. And that's it. Next, I'm going to talk to you about your final projects.